We're proud to announce CISO Stories, a new podcast series in partnership with Cybersecurity Collaborative and Cybereason. CISO Stories features the candid perspectives and experiences of frontline senior security executives and dives deep into timely security topics. CISO Stories is hosted by Todd Fitzgerald, VP of Cybersecurity Strategy at Cybersecurity Collaborative, and Sam Curry, Chief Product and Security Officer at Cybereason. Listen weekly as they speak with extraordinary CISOs by visiting securityweekly.com/CSP. Welcome back, everyone, to Paul's Security Weekly. If you've got a specific guest or topic you'd like us to cover on one of the upcoming shows, submit your suggestions for guests by visiting securityweekly.com/guests. Complete that form. We review those on about a weekly basis now. This segment is sponsored by Firemon. To learn more, visit securityweekly.com/Firemon. With me today is Mr. Josh Marpet joining me for this interview. Josh, welcome.
Hey, absolute pleasure, and it's always good to see Rich again.
Yes. And joining us for this interview is none other than Rich Mogull from Firemon. Rich is one of the foremost experts on cloud security, having driven development of the Cloud Security Alliance's V4 guidance and the associated CCSK training curriculum. Today, he joins us to discuss the unique challenges of companies born in the cloud. Rich, welcome to the show.
Great to be back as always, although I'm feeling a little underdressed. Maybe I need to turn some colored lights on for my background here.
Yeah, it's seemingly random. Like sometimes I dress up, sometimes I don't. I don't know.
Yeah, but you didn't warn me. I could have worn a collared Firemon shirt. Come on, man. You're putting me in a bad spot, Paul, that you're getting us off to a terrible start.
Look, I'll make you feel better. I'm wearing my Firefly shirt, okay?
Nice.
All right. Thanks, Josh. It's good to know you're there for me.
Yeah. Rich, it's good to have you on, and we hope that you find an appropriate title at some point, which is kind of funny. You don't have a title.
Yeah. These are the things when you deal with company acquisitions. So we're actually close to making announcements on that, but I didn't want to get ahead of the skis and bring it up on the webcast.
But I like that you're like making an announcement about your title. This is a great marketing opportunity.
Well, yeah. I mean, we have a marketing team now, so I've got to give them something to do, and it has to be about me.
So, Rich, I just want to, obviously, and these questions are about you right now as well, which is kind of ironic. So, you founded a different company from Disrupt Ops before that. Tell us about, you were with, give us some of the history.
Yeah. So, I mean, technically, I founded a company called Evil Squirrel Enterprises, but that one's not overly relevant. But I founded Securosis. God, I think it was about 15 years ago when I left Gartner and didn't want to go, work for a vendor.
Right. Boy, so what was Securosis, just for our audience? Give them a little bit of background.
So Securosis is a research and advisory firm, and we did a lot of white papers, blogging, presentations, a lot of research. And our big focus at Securosis was we wanted to be pragmatic research, or we called it no bullshit research. So, I had come out of Gartner and actually I had a great experience at Gartner, but I was just speaking to Gartner clients. I couldn't just write research and give it away for free. And that research was also very product focused. It wasn't very practitioner focused in a lot of cases. So that whole objective with Securosis was to kind of be able to give stuff away for free, participate in the community dialogue, and figure out some other way to make money. And then, because, I didn't have kids at the time, but they came soon after that, and they eat and stuff.
Yeah.
Figure out how to do that, give away that research, and still participate and contribute to the community. So it led us in a lot of different directions. And one of those is kind of what eventually led to where we are now.
How did you learn so much about the cloud? Because you have a lot of knowledge about AWS, and you and I have worked together on other projects. And I was like, Rich, you've got you were early in the cloud, right?
It was kind of weird. So when the Cloud Security Alliance started, I wasn't one of the founding members, but I got involved pretty early on. And what really kicked off escalating my knowledge or skills was the CSA, Jim Rivas, who's the CEO over there, approached me. He's like, hey, we want to build a training class. Can you do that? And I realized, almost nobody has hands-on with cloud, and they want to call themselves cloud experts. So why don't we build the training program, and we have a version of it that's like just lecture, but let's do labs. And that led me to not only having to use the stuff in Amazon myself, and Azure was barely even in existence, wasn't even an option back then. Google was, the search engine, didn't have any products there.
Yeah. So what time frame we talking about when you were doing this?
About 2008, I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
2008, 2009, around that time frame. And so I had to build the labs and get deeper into using the technology. Now, here's the reason I feel pretty comfortable, especially with AWS, is when I started, Amazon didn't even have IAM. I mean, there was some internal stuff. It didn't have the VPC. It didn't have a lot of the kinds of capabilities it had today. So I like to joke that I learned in the Commodore 64 days of cloud,
right,
when there was less you had to cover. And I got to grow my skills over time as Amazon kept adding and adding and adding. And I still barely can keep up. I can. There's nobody who knows everything about any of these providers.
You have to specialize now.
Yeah. There's just so much. There's other great people out there. And I mean, I could name names and throw, and I'd probably forget people. There's Will Bengtson, who I've done some work with on incident response stuff. And he's came out of Netflix, done tons of things. Scott Piper, he's over at, sorry, I forget the new name of Square, but, doing stuff over there. There's Chris Fair. There's like this Houston Hopkins. There's this huge list of incredibly knowledgeable people that I learn from all the time. And you put us all in a room, not one of us knows everything that all the others know. And this is all we all do. And that's just on Amazon, never mind the other providers. So yeah, there's a lot. I got involved early because of the Cloud Security Alliance and getting into the hands-on stuff, and then building and experimenting and doing conference presentations, and eventually, building a startup in that area. And that's when things really escalated.
And so that's when you spun up Disrupt Ops, was specifically to consult on the cloud stuff. Not even consult, but build a product.
It was an accident. So I did a Black Hat presentation. I'd been running some trainings at Black Hat. And the funny story is, and Trey Ford, who some of you know gets credit for this, I was a backup speaker. I didn't even have a regular session. I wake up at like 8 a.m. on whatever, it would have been Wednesday morning, and there's like 30 calls from Trey on my phone. I'm like, I'm really hungover, by the way. I shouldn't admit that, but I was. I had finished teaching. I was done for the week.
Oh, yes. I've been there. I have also trained at Black Hat. And after the final day of teaching, you're like, man, I just need to go have a couple drinks, right? Yeah.
I think the operative word there is couple, and I don't think that's actually potentially true, Paul, but we'll leave it alone for now.
Several would be a more accurate term, yes.
I've run an actual marathon and many half marathons, and Black Hat's harder, doing 4 days of being just on the ball, for 8 hour plus days of teaching. It's physically exhausting. So had a good night. I have all these calls from trainings like, hey, we had a speaker pull out. Can you cover with your cloud talk stuff? I'm like, oh, sure. And then I realized I kind of had a demo, but I had broken it during teaching, and I didn't have any slides, and I didn't have a talk track. And I had 90 minutes to get all of that done and get on stage. And I did all of it.
Wow.
And it was a career personal highlight for me. I've never done anything before since. It really was I don't know how I pulled it off fundamentally. But then I had a few people from pretty large forward-looking cloud companies come up and going, users of cloud, hey, can I get a copy of your demos? We need to do this. And it was all about cloud automation. So I spent about a year doing versions of that talk on the conference circuit, and every time everybody's coming in. And I expected some vendor to pick up on this and start doing it, and nobody was. And so I realized, I think I kind of need to do this. And that was the foundations of what became Disrupt Ops.
So what did Disrupt Ops start as? I mean, what did it do? Was it just plain cloud? I mean, not plain, but was it cloud automation as thoroughly as you've done it currently, or where did it start? Do you mind if I ask?
No, that's a great question, because it has really evolved, because the customer requirements, what people are looking for, has changed. So in the early days, around that time, there was Evident.io had appeared, and there was the very earliest of assessing cloud environments. And we didn't fully want to do that. We were focused on automating remediations, fixing things. Now, of course, in the process to fix things, you have to find things. And there wasn't a lot of good tooling to find things. So we were kind of going down that path. I'm going to skip over a bunch of things in the middle, but what we found is customers love the idea of automation, but in practice, they were really scared of it. And at the same time, we didn't want to be a vulnerability assessment product like what a bunch of our earlier competitors turned into. And there's nothing wrong with those. They're incredibly valuable, finding all the misconfigurations. But, I mean, Paul, you get it. You've been in that market. It becomes a race to the bottom. How many thousands of things can you look for? And it becomes very hard to differentiate. So we really, as a company, like, you know what, we want to be the ones to help cloud security operations. We want to help fix problems. We want to help better communicate problems. We want to support the operational side of it, not just do the assessment sides. And that's really what, over time, and we've got a bunch of, features and capabilities and stuff, but that's what led us to where we are today. So at one point, we probably leaned too heavy in the assessment piece. And it wasn't really what we wanted to do, but that's what customers were looking for. And it was a bit of our fault. We were going on to step 3 and we forgot to deal with step 1. And over the years, it's been about 5 years we've been working on this as a team now. We cracked it. I mean, not just now. A while ago, we really kind of figured out the path. And that's kind of what made us interesting to Firemon, is taking much more of this cloud security operations focus. And for example, doing real-time detections of, the cloud providers have like guard duty and, Defender for Cloud. Hey, let's take the alerts out of that near real time. Let's automatically filter them, forward them to the appropriate team, and deal with getting past the organizational silos of security doesn't have access to the cloud environment, but the cloud people don't see the security stuff, like bridging those kind of operational gaps. And that's just one example of, in our cloud detection response features, of where we've kind of focused these things.
So it's not necessarily about configuration management or vulnerability scanning or what we'd call cloud security posture management. It's more about the operational aspects of security in the cloud, if you will.
Yeah, absolutely. And so for us, that's focusing on kind of 3 key areas right now. We know this will evolve over time. One is what we call cloud detection and response, which is routing the right information to the right people. It's not all just about incident response. In cloud, a problem may not be a problem. You have to go check with let me take a step back. If you think about one of the key impacts on security operations that cloud brings, it's that what used to be naturally centralized and gatekept functions, such as firewall management, because only security or network ops had access to the firewalls, has become much more distributed in cloud, because individual teams are building those rules into their CI/CD pipelines, or they're managing them themselves. So there's this kind of democratization, because there's no gatekeepers because of having to run things in a data center, and only somebody can access those boxes. That really affects security in a lot of very profound ways. And some of them are things we don't address, and some of them we do. But how do you deal with the privilege management of who can do what? How do you still allow security to keep an eye on things and enforce rules when they need to? How do you make sure that you can engage with those teams across these organizational silos, which has become one of the biggest? So,
yeah, and Rich, I want to stop you right there, because I think there's a really good delineation between the way we used to do things and the way we do things today. Because a lot of the assets that you're talking about, they don't have a name or IP address that I can identify and scan. And I was thinking about this the other day when I was trying to connect to a database, and I was like, oh, right, the rules in the VPC don't allow me to connect directly to the database. And I was like, how would I know if that changed? And how would I scan it? Like, I don't have a set IP address range in Amazon AWS. I don't assign a DNS name to that database, perhaps. And I would never know if this stuff changed. Is that kind of capturing some of what the problem that you're addressing?
Well, yeah, exactly. And so there's 2 aspects of that. One is your cloud security posture management can assess what's going on, but if it's not a rule violation, like a database becoming public, it may not necessarily flag something. The other thing you can do is you can tap into like near real-time feeds of changes in the environment, like the API calls to make changes. So if that was a sensitive database, you could put a flag on it that you could, generate an alert if somebody opens up the firewall or the security group rule, the internal one, something along those lines. And what's cool is, if you really think about the problem, what I'd like to do is, could be incredible high volume of alerts that I don't even know how to deal with. But what if I send that alert to the team that's responsible for managing that resource over Slack, and they just click a button that says, oh, I didn't mean to do this. And then it becomes a security alert at that point. So that's taking much more of the operations focus versus the pure assessment focus. And that's how we're, trying to differentiate ourselves. But, and that's just one part of the problem, that operations piece. There's a lot of other, obviously different implications for security operations in cloud. This is just one facet of it.
Agreed.
So
Yeah.
it's interesting, but so I've got a couple of questions. A comment, actually. You said that it's a democratization of operations and security. And I think that the method you're going about it with, hey, push it out to somebody in, say, Slack, and then if they click the button, then it becomes a security issue, as you put it. That's a democratization of the response. And I like that very much.
Yeah, no, I wish I could claim credit. I first heard about this from Ryan Huber, who used to work over at Slack. And I can't remember his current company. He went out and took some tech and did a cool startup. But he described this to me years ago. But it was something that he had kind of built himself, kind of an internal thing. And to me, like, if I think about how do I deal with the problem of the teams can do their own stuff, security doesn't have the domain knowledge of those environments, but we can't just let these things be unmanaged and, make this more of a real-time sort of collaborative. How can security help the teams? How can the teams help security? And that's kind of what led us to doing that piece of it. Now, there's other extensions, like we're starting to add a lot more incident response, like pure, like cloud SOAR basically kinds of stuff, because when it does become an incident, how do you support incident response in the cloud? Or how do you actually deal with things like, hey, we want to lock down an environment and let an admin, we want to know when an admin is escalating their privileges to make a change in like a production environment. And so this gets into like just-in-time access is a big trend in cloud security these days. And there's the cloud providers have some stuff. There's third-party stuff. Obviously, that's something that we've built that we're getting ready to go out a little bit bigger with. I probably shouldn't talk too much about it quite yet. But so these are all like really interesting operational problems. And to me, it's more interesting because it's about how can we find and fix problems faster, focusing more on the fixing the problems faster and responding to issues more quickly.
So I've got a couple of other sort of follow-on questions to that. And one is, you've laid out some capabilities of Disrupt Ops and what you've built and such. Does it change from cloud to cloud? And then the other follow-up to that is, did you hear about Linode just got acquired? And will that actually be added to part of your Akamai bought them, I believe. Will that be added to your and the reason I mention it is because they're now being listed as the cloud outlet or product for Akamai. Will you be doing stuff with them as well?
So we're really focused on the big three right now. And that's Amazon, Microsoft, and Google. And there's a lot of other people that want to buy into those markets. But until you're spending, billions of dollars a month, you're not going to buy into those markets effectively. I just had to say it. I mean, there are others. IBM comes up, Oracle comes up. And when the time is right, we'll support those. But there's just so much runway. I'll be completely honest. Like Linode right now, it's just not going to be a focus for us because that's not what that's not where I have never worked a Linode project on the Securasys side or had a request from a customer on the Disrupt Ops side.
It makes sense.
Yeah, I think largely enterprise adoption is, like you said, Reg, it's the big three because there's so much more functionality and proven functionality in those services.
Yeah, and to go to your first question, Josh, the differences do matter. So like some of the planning of this, and this is what makes it really hard for anyone who's writing their own tools or, vendors like ourselves, because there's a lot of wonderful open source things out there too and I participate in some of those that can really help orgs who aren't, kind of ready to make the jump. And yeah, the providers are all a bit different. So like the way we're doing the just-in-time stuff for our, and we call it Cloud Access Manager on for Amazon, which is the first platform to support. Doing that in Azure totally has to be different because of like really low-level technical differences. And I'm happy to jump in them, but with Amazon, you have multiple roles and a user can assume a different role for a given session. But with Azure, you're a user in a group and in a role in an environment, and that's that. You don't get to
but on the Disrupt
go in as a read role and then a write role. What?
But on the Disrupt Ops side, I mean, you've got to be able to essentially code it for handling the watching and the everything for the three major clouds, as you put it. So out of curiosity, I mean, which cloud is easiest to monitor, do you think? Which cloud is easiest to work with? I've got to ask. I've got to ask.
Yeah, no, my personal bias is I just like working with Amazon better right now. And some of that's comfort because I've got more time in Amazon than I have in Azure or in Google. Some of it is Amazon is legitimately more mature. If you really dig into the weeds, like look at their Nitro architecture stuff, like there's nobody kind of touching those capabilities at this point. And that's not a monitoring thing. That's Basically, that's the hardware platform for instances, and the VM, the instances, is what supports containers, and it's what supports serverless. The Lambda functions, everything builds on that. A lot of really, really wild built-in hardware security functions and performance functions. Then Microsoft has a couple of areas where they're actually slightly easier, but also harder. The tapping into the environments for some of the logging stuff. Amazon can be a pain because you have to deal with certain region issues and everything depending on what you're looking for. Microsoft actually isn't quite as bad on that piece of it, but like Microsoft doesn't give you read activity for their API calls. So with Amazon, you can monitor read activity and look for reconnaissance. With Azure, you can't. And that's why they don't like. Also, Azure, there's a split between Azure Active Directory and the Azure cloud itself, and that gets confusing. So I that's kind of why I prefer Amazon. I have not personally spent as much time in Google. They're kind of a little bit in between. I suspect I'd probably have a better time if I spent more time with Google. It's just I have more requests to deal with Microsoft than with Google. So that kind of keeps most of my time between those two, and only a little bit of time I get to put in on the Google stuff.
Rich, I want to just talk a little bit about trends and then how those trends are impacting how people think about operations and security when we are pushing apps and other things into the cloud. We've gone on this progression of, do people there are still apps hosted locally, right? Which is hard. Like if you're not one of those companies, it's kind of hard to think back that I've got software running on actual hardware. That does happen certainly in different verticals, right? But if you look at tech and retail and finance and those kind of companies, right? Most people have pushed at least up into a virtual machine environment, correct?
Well, not necessarily. There's a lot of old school on-premise stuff still.
Yeah,
there's massive.
I think we forget about that, right? If you're working in the cloud world or whatever, you kind of forget that there's this progression.
Yeah, I would like to, but a lot of because I still do advisory projects, and that comes up all the time. For example, I finished one recently where it was containers, but it was on premise, and it was running OpenShift on premise was the focus, and that they kind of had control of, and they actually didn't have much control of at comparative levels of control on the cloud side, but they also didn't have production workloads on the cloud side. So I do a lot of CI/CD pipeline assessments, and almost all of those involve on-premise components of it when we're talking DevOpsy sorts of things. The vast majority of workloads today are still on-premise in data centers. They're not up in the cloud. And it's really easy for cloud people to forget that, where a lot of, when I go in particular when I'm working with very large enterprises, Fortune 100, Fortune 500, Fortune 50 or 10 in some cases, they have a lot that it's on. There's not going to move all that to cloud anytime soon. They shouldn't. Doesn't make sense for them to do it because that hardware is paid off. Those operations are humming. They're up and running. But when you start trying to have to figure out how to migrate those things up and those strategies and to harmonize kind of your security, that's where things become really interesting. And so I'm getting more exposure, honestly, post-acquisition to that because Firemon covers cloud, but also the traditional security manager product is very much focused on these on-premise environments. And that's been the bread and butter. And it's forcing me to actually I haven't had to look at regular networking in like 15 years. I got to ignore it all. I worked with Mike Rothman. He did the networking stuff. And looking at those network complexities, and now you're bridging in the cloud and dealing with the hybrid scenarios, and how do you harmonize and manage that? And the teams don't always get to hire enough people to cover the new stuff. So they're forced to cover both.
But I think that's
really,
valid.
really hard.
But there's two aspects, right? I've suffered from this as well. It's a lot of work to retrofit and change an application to be all the way into cloud native, right? From wherever you're at, all the way into cloud native is a really big lift. You need a lot of resources to do that.
Yeah.
And then you have to change your security model and processes, which is where now Firemon, right, with DisruptOps kind of comes in to help with that as well. But then there's multiple big areas to consider when you're doing this.
It's hard, and I hate that, the Twitter universe, for example, the echo chamber sometimes pretends it's not hard.
Yeah.
There's a saying I said years ago that it wasn't even cloud specific, but people are like, well, that should be easy. I'm like, simple doesn't scale. And the simplest patching the simplest vulnerability doesn't scale. And it really is a massive challenge to deal with that. Absolutely.
But your camera's frozen on a very unflattering still shot.
Yeah, so I
don't know.
I can do a couple of clicks here and get that fixed.
Yeah,
Hold on. But let me switch to a different camera because I know what happened. And so my video won't look as good, but I'll be live again.
There you go. He's live again.
There you go. It's not bad.
There we go.
All right.
Yeah. So, Rich, when you're trying to push this application into cloud native service, I mean, let's talk about user management. How do I gain visibility? Because I don't want to write. So I guess it's just a two-part question, right? I don't want to write the user management myself. I want to leverage something in the cloud like AWS Cognito. First, like, what are the challenges to getting there? And secondly, how do you help me monitor that situation? Because that's a very critical piece to monitor.
Yeah, I mean, we made the early decision, for example, to use Cognito ourselves when we were building it. That was one of the things I'm like, I don't want to build an authentication layer. I mean, authorization, we always still need to deal with.
Sure.
But the authentication piece and doing that securely, in app development, to me, that and session management are like two of the hardest things to get right. So I might as well use a cloud service if I can. Now, problem with Cognito is it's got a lot of edges. It has some really sharp edges when you go to use it for real. So there's two pieces of this. We got to build it natively. So I almost don't count when we first built Disrupt Ops, I almost don't count that because we had sharp edges and we actually had to do a big update, like 6 months ago because of hitting some limits within it. But that's different. If you have an existing user base, you need to migrate that in and change all of your authentication. That becomes tremendously more difficult at that point in time. When you have the opportunity to use those capabilities, to me, it helps me in two areas. One is it changes my attack surface into Amazon's attack surface, as long as I do my configurations correctly.
Right.
Number two, it reduces my security management service. I'm not dealing with rotating certificates or crypto for Cognito or API gateway. Well, maybe if I'm using my own certs, but there's aspects of that the cloud provider is taking off your shoulders. You don't lose accountability for all of that, though. So obviously, you need to constantly still keep an eye on things, and that configuration becomes critical. So there's really two pieces of that. There's the one is cloud security posture management can help. It can. It's not what we're building our stuff to do, but I think it's a valuable contributor in that it'll help find the known misconfigurations. The other thing I always want to know is tracking the changes in those environments. And dev, I don't worry too much about. I'm not going to look at every individual thing, but like I have a list that I've had even before getting into this cloud stuff. There are always kind of like 2 or 3 things as a security admin that I would always want to know changed in my applications that I built myself. 1, any changes to authentication. 2, any changes to session management. And 3 is any changes to any crypto functions. And those we can monitor in cloud. Because if I push that into the cloud management plane, I can look for the API calls that could change those things. And in a real production application, those things don't change too much very often. There's a lower velocity of change. Especially once you get those deployments out, and this is kind of one of the things we realize as we move down this cloud detection response path is all of a sudden my user activity can become threat indicators in a much more deterministic way if I handle production different than development, and if I rely more on CI/CD pipelines versus manual building. Like all of a sudden I've got roadmaps I can pull from to solve some security problems that in the data center were near impossible to solve. Because in the data center, admins are always logging in to change these things. On the cloud side, I only really am following, looking at the major configuration changes. And then and if I'm able to instrument and focus on those production changes and even say, did the change come from a person versus my CI/CD pipeline? that starts becoming a more manageable problem for something that's super hard. So I know I went a little bit on a tangent, but you did ask me about using of those services and then monitoring of those services. And, I use those myself all the time. Migrating an existing user base to those, that's a much heavier lift because you really have to do data transformations, input your functions, swap over to a running application. That's a big lift.
And you're not even mentioning the workflows that go around it on the human side, on the development side, on the operations side, on the monitoring. There's a lot of pieces to this that are not just the application and the data and the processing in between. There's a lot of pieces to this.
And it's even hard, doing enabling SAML for customers versus coming out of your own user pool. And there's a lot of these really lower level technical details, and you can screw them up in ways that, even good tools aren't always going to detect if you pick things wrong, if you have some of the less obvious settings wrong. So, it takes really good domain knowledge to get that stuff right.
Yeah, and going back to something you said earlier, I'm seeing a lot of larger companies do customer-facing pieces in the cloud, so it'll scale very easily, but hold on to their data on-prem, hold on to a lot of the back-end processing on-prem because they have that centralized control. They have those, as you put it, sunk cost of the machines. The workflows and processes and people are already done. We don't have to think about it. And all they do is they put their website, their front end, and maybe some of the data processing in the cloud so it can auto-scale efficiently. And honestly, I kind of like that model. I'm not going to lie.
No, I have from the earliest days, as much as I'm a cloud advocate, I think you can be more secure in cloud than on-premise for most organizations. Not all, but most. I think we have all these incredible benefits by moving things up into the cloud. Don't be stupid about it. I mean, come on, man. It has to make sense to move that thing to the cloud in the first place. Not everything makes sense to move into the cloud. And I think people get really caught up in the trends. So I did a bunch of research on what I call cloud adoption patterns and cloud journeys. And, the ones that are really, really hard is we want to be out of the data center in 24 months because that's when our current contract expires. So everything's going to move to cloud. That's going to guarantee you're going to screw a lot up. I agree. And they, by the way, they don't want to hire enough people to do that. You're not going to be successful.
The kiss of death right there.
But I see it all the time, all the time. I mean, weekly, I talk with, maybe not weekly. Sometimes I take vacations, but, all the time we hear about that. I got to move it in 18 months. I have to move it in 12 months, 24 months. I mean, that's just ridiculous. On the other hand, we have some large orgs that do these massive data center migrations. We're going to move everything up, over 5 years, but then they spend so much time pre-architecting everything and figuring out how to move all the existing stuff. Whatever.
The cloud changes.
I think the success is new to cloud and refactoring. When does it make sense to throw pieces into the cloud, keep it connected to on-prem? Let's get value over our existing investments. And when the on-prem databases are getting long in the tooth and that hardware is getting old, then let's look at migrating that stuff up. Not everything.
So you migrate, but I think this has both an operational benefit and a security benefit to migrate strategically pieces of your applications into the cloud, taking advantage of functionality where it makes most sense for the business and also with a security lens as well, whether it makes more sense for security or you can monitor it and you have to do a little work to move that piece up into the cloud and still have that security visibility, which is, I think, where DisruptOps comes in to help give me that visibility when I move anything from a file system to a secrets vault to a whatever it is, processing function of any kind, correct?
Yeah, exactly. It's all about ensuring that you can support your operations when you're getting that stuff up there appropriately. And to be honest, this is where the traditional Firemon stuff, and this is why, honestly, as a founder, when somebody comes in to acquire, does it make sense?
Yeah.
And Firemon being a network security operations focused company, and with DisruptOps being a cloud security operations, and honestly, a lot of these migrations, a bunch of the networking stuff becomes all, critical. I'm okay, that actually, there's a story there. That makes sense. It's all about security operations pieces of it. But yeah, you have to know what you have and what makes sense to migrate. And then to the best of your ability, you want to refactor it so it's as cloud native as possible. And some things you can build at brand new front ends in cloud and do a serverless web or whatever else. Sometimes you can't. So the old Securosys.com, which we still run, we did a refactor of that. and we fully changed the network architecture. We got a ton of security. I have a concept I call minimum viable networking that I like to talk about at times. So we re-architected the network for minimum viable networking. We pulled out, we moved everything into auto scaling. We pulled out static files and moved things into S3 and shimmed in file systems. And that re-architecture wasn't horrific, but gave us tons of like both security and operational benefits when we did it. And those are the kind of moves that make a lot of sense. And we cut our costs by over 90%. We were paying $2,000 a month for our hosting. We dropped it down to about $120 a month to keep a more resilient architecture running in AWS. That should be what you get out of these things. You shouldn't just move it to cloud to move it to cloud.
Yeah, having a cost savings, being more resilient, performant, and secure. I mean, those are all really compelling reasons. But that's not every case as I'm learning. Yeah, but that's not every case as I'm learning.
No, it's not. Yeah, because we've talked, about your internal stuff,
Mm-hmm.
And as you move it, and the cloud is filled with razor blades.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just filled with razor blades. Like, and they're invisible. Or,
like you don't know till you get there. Yeah, you don't know till you get there. And you're like,
all right, ladies and gentlemen, you've heard it here first. Rich Mogull, the cloud is filled with invisible razor blades.
Yeah, pretty much.
It is. Wow, that I should go tweet that. Can we pause?
I really should, man.
That's a good one. It is.
Yeah. But it is. And that's why, like, one of the things that really pisses me off about this is I go into all these orgs and everybody wants to move stuff to cloud, and there's all these big cloud initiatives, or they want to build new stuff into cloud, and then they want to go multi-cloud. I'm like, you want to go multi-cloud, go triple your security staff.
Yeah.
Like, everybody wants to do this, and they don't want to hire the people. And admittedly, it is hard. So then, okay, well, that's fine. Use the people you have and give them time to learn. But they don't do that either. So to vendors like us, we're trying our best to like make this stuff easier, and help pull some of those things off the shoulders to help people be more efficient. And again, that's why I get excited about the operational side of things. I'm not showing you more problems. I'm trying to help you fix your problems. That's what I want to build. And the showing of the problems is important. I'm not saying it's not. It's just not the problem I think is fun to solve. It's the fixing of the problems and resolving of issues and incidents and getting stuff hardened. That's more fun. But no vendor can make up for you not having enough people. Or giving them the time to learn what they need to learn.
Yeah, and not having the right knowledge and skill set. And not to say that like people are stupid, right? That's not what Rich and I are saying at all.
No.
It takes time to learn, and everyone's time is going to be slightly different to come up to speed on various things, but it's something you have to spend some time with to learn.
Yeah, I mean, I've got 12 years of hands-on of this stuff, and I still screw up all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I'm no smarter than anyone. Okay, well, no, I'm smarter than some people, and I know who they are. That was a joke.
Rich, your title keeps going down as we speak. Stop.
Yeah, things. But it's not even that, with this cloud stuff, I'm no genius, man. I just got to start like earlier. Like, I got to learn my ABCs, and you guys all have to like start at War and Peace. Like, you didn't get the middle ground, I had my board books and, my early days of Amazon.
When you're trying to learn cloud technologies as a generic term, how do you recommend people approach, like, I want to get to the point where I can automate it with some kind of terraforming, right, kind of scripting? How do I learn that? Do I like go build it first and learn it and then learn how to script it? Like, how do we approach this?
Everybody has ways that they like to do it. My personal preference is I need to get hands-on. I do it in the console.
Mm-hmm.
I build it by hand to start and figure out the features and the settings and how it works. And I read all the documentation, and that gives me a lot. I'll give you specific examples. So for the Black Hat training I do with Will Bengtson, we built an incident response simulation framework last year, which ended up becoming far more bigger and complex than I imagined. We can run simultaneous attacks on hundreds of Amazon accounts that simulate real world attacks. And I just had to go in and manually build the pieces to figure out how the components I needed to tie together worked. Then I kind of moved that, and a lot of this was code. It wasn't just the Amazon infrastructure. Then I started moving that into the templates. So a simple example, we needed to build a fake web server, or a real web server, I guess, vulnerable to a known SSRF vulnerability that we could exploit and then use as part of our attack to simulate the full SSRF attack chain. To do that, Will built the web server pieces and gave me the code, and I deployed it manually. And then we used a combination of at that point we started scripting out, like on my desktop, the code to attack it. And that was all like that first phase. But eventually the deployment of that, I moved it into CloudFormation templates. The code got packaged up. Things got moved into serverless functions. Like, it all changes, and then it got containerized. So the way I like to learn the newer things I need to learn in any of the cloud providers, go build a bunch of it by hand. You'll learn a ton, and prototype it out. And if you want to learn how to use a service, you can't just look at the service in the console and figure it all out. Give yourself an objective. In other words, I'm going to build something that uses that tool in this very basic way. So I played with some IoT stuff. I just built a little IoT button to send me an email, like just something super simple like that. But that forces you to chain the components together. You can't just look in the console. You can't just read the documentation and know how it works. Build something really basic and simple. Then when you convert that to infrastructure as code, that really takes it up to the next level. Yeah. Because now you're learning the IAC piece of it, Terraform, CloudFormation, CDK, whatever that's going to be. And then from there, you get to expand it out. So sometimes I'll find that I've learned it well enough, I can just write the new version in IAC. I don't have to prototype it, or I'll at least change some capabilities of it in IAC and still go through testing and in the pipeline.
But I like your advice, Rich, because this some of my experience as well. If you look at an application that's already built and you go wherever it's built, and you go, I want to replicate that in the cloud, and I want to Terraform it and script it, and you're in for a world of hurt. And your advice is awesome. Take maybe a piece of that, maybe it's something else that's very small and not as complex. Learn how to get it all the way through automation and in stages, and that's good advice.
Yeah, and honestly, this is like how we build product features. Our devs will go in and they'll hand build when they need to. Some things, there's some stuff that's just straight up code. So like the platform's all serverless. It's predominantly Lambda functions. You don't need to go in and like manually build the Lambda function. They just run it locally and do local testing and everything. But like if we need to add a new service, so we had to change how we were pulling events from like an API gateway model to an event bridge model as event bridge. Because like one of the things you find as you're building these things, the cloud providers keep adding capabilities that enhance your ability to do what you want. And so the more you can track to those, you're always going to lag what the providers are doing. But eventually those services usually get to a point where it's worth switching over. That gets prototyped manually. Then once it's locked down, that gets built into the Terraform templates for production. But we have like, I don't even know how many dev environments at this point where people just screw around with stuff to figure out how it works. Then they'll start to build it into the platform and code it. Then it goes into development. Then it moves into staging, and then it moves into production.
And how do you do development locally when you're doing some of this in the cloud? Is that possible, or it depends on what you're building?
Yeah, you can, depending on which services and stuff you're using. There's like serverless framework and some of those other things will do local mockups so that you can actually run localized testing. I'm terrible in that I don't do as much of that as I should. So what I'll typically do is because I don't work on the production product, I do more experimentation work. So I'll tend to just run direct API calls into one of my cloud environments from my system. Where I tend to do that is I'll write a lot of the code locally, and then I'll test those API calls and such with my computer I'm talking to on making those connections into AWS. Then depending on what I'm doing, it'll either move into a container or move into a Lambda function. So that's when I have to make adjustments to the code and then push that into the cloud environment in both ways. So like the incident response stuff, we tend to run more of that in containers because we actually run those containers all over the world to simulate different attack sources. So I can simulate attacks coming from hostile nations basically by running containers there, and I couldn't do that as a Lambda function. But other functional pieces are internal Lambdas, and so I'll push those out differently.
So do you think for quite a long time we're going to have this mix of container and serverless cloud native function? I guess it's three separate things, right? Containers, serverless, and cloud native. There's always going to be a mix of the three for a while.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of the things one of my pet peeves right now in the industry is everybody wants to Kubernetes everything, and which is one of the dumbest fucking things you can do. Sorry, explicit tag.
No, I agree.
Let's take something really complex that very few people understand and know how to run properly, move our critical enterprise applications into it, and then move it onto a cloud platform that we don't have enough people to know how to run that properly. So let's add abstraction on top of abstraction and complexity, for complexity's sake. I don't get it.
But the benefit to Kubernetes is mostly scale, right? It's mostly having more scale and maybe
it's
resiliency.
More orchestration.
Yeah, orchestration. But that benefit of that orchestration is scale and resiliency.
Resiliency. I wouldn't say scale. I mean, I can auto scale in AWS until the cows come home, right, Rich?
Sure.
Yeah. I mean, to me, it's one of the more misused technologies out there because of the complexity it adds and the service mesh stuff and all these other things. And everybody wants to go microservices. I personally, my containers, I use ECS, not EKS. I use Amazon Simplify Container Service over Kubernetes because I just don't want to deal with. Kubernetes was written to handle the very difficult problems that Google deals with. And it's very much the origins of it, and we know that that's where it came from. Like, they have needs that a lot of other organizations don't. I see stuff being put up in there because that's just become the hot trendy thing, where either more simplified containers and more simplified architectures would absolutely meet those needs. Serverless, I mean, not everything makes sense to run as serverless. I
think what we're seeing is that sometimes simplicity and process beats out shiny.
Oh, yeah. I mean, keep it simple, stupid. And I'm stupid. So I'm going to keep it simple and not add complexity that we don't need to add, because complexity introduces more points of failure. Let me give you an example. So I just got back. I did a 2-week federal deployment as a paramedic in an ER. And you guys know, well, Paul knows, Josh, I think you probably know as well. I'm a federal disaster response paramedic. It's like my youthful indiscretion side hobby. Probably shouldn't word it that way, because when patients don't want to think that what you're doing when you're treating them, that it's just a hobby. Anyway, there was a situation. There's a thing we do these days called end tidal CO2. You monitor the CO2 somebody is breathing out. And it turns out that's a really effective way to figure out if their metabolism is messed up, because CO2 directly correlates with the pH of your blood, how acidic you are. And there's all sorts of things, like really, really, really important tool that we have. And we had a patient we need to measure it on. And in this particular facility, the particular room we were in had like this do everything monitor but it wasn't all set up properly for the CO2. And you had to pick up another module, and you had to plug that in and plug these other things in. And it turned out it wasn't calibrated because nobody had used it in a while, like this incredibly complex thing, and people are getting hamstrung. And I looked over next to it and I'm like, well, there's the same monitors we carry on the ambulance that you use to like actually defibrillate people. And that has the same function built in, and it's designed to be firefighter proof. So let's just grab that simple one and let's plug it in and let's get it going. We just put the two monitors next to each other, problem solved. Like, let's not add these layers of abstraction, layers of complexity where you have to have the right module plugged in, and then somebody from the service management team has to recalibrate it every month, or you're not allowed to use it anymore. Like, that's just going to make things break.
It's true.
I mean, to be clear, let me be clear on this. When he said it's firefighter proof, it means that an idiot with gloves on can work it, because I'm an ex-firefighter. So yeah, I understand that. That works out well.
Yeah, that was the joke. You can put a firefighter in a round room with a bowling ball and no furniture, and he'll lose it or break it.
And I feel like it took me longer than it should have to come to the realization that on the operational side, and played with security, that Slack is a great tool to keep it simple and get information to the right people. Like, we can build all these complex systems to route tickets and track things and all the stuff. But I'm like, or we could just put it in Slack. There's that.
That was one of our realizations. Like, let's use the tool that everybody is using. All the developers have Slack or Teams. I mean, we do both. All the security people, they have Slack or Teams, whatever your org is using, at least these days. Like, you're not sending them into another tool with spreadsheets and everything else. So let's push it to them with a button as simple as I did this.
Right.
And if they don't respond in a time period, that could kick off an automation. Or now we have more advanced stuff, like for orgs that want to go into automation, we can actually package the undo this action. Hey, port 22 is now open on this security group. You can click a button that says quarantine that, or not even quarantine it, remove that rule. And it'll remove just that rule. Just trying to come up with ways of solving the problem without breaking things. And let the admins do that, because they own the environment. Like, security is not always allowed to go in and make operational changes to running production environments. So let's just push the recommended fix directly to the operational team and make it very easy for them to click the button and get it done.
Yeah, I like that approach.
So it's automation, but it still has the human in the loop. And some orgs actually just turn on full automations for like never have a public S3 bucket. I mean, that's a whole different kind of a thing. But there's like this real big range where you're never going to be able to write the policy to know if every edge case is right or wrong, that the automation could fix it. So let's just automate the detection of those cases and send them to the person who is going to know that environment. And then security is on that, sees it on their checklist as well. So they get to know who fixed it, when it was fixed, how long it was, exposed for, stuff like that. That's the stuff that I find to be the very interesting operational problems. Like, how do we deal with the people side of this and reduce the opportunities for mistakes or for fights between orgs?
Yeah,
like, how do we actually
friction.
deal with that?
Yeah, reducing friction is big, Rich. And I think that it sounds like there's a really good partnership between DisruptOps and Firemon. Knowing about Firemon previously, I think you've definitely found a really good match there, and you have the same mission, which I think is key.
Yeah, and it was, once I sat down and looked at, because I had not done as much with Firemon. I mean, our CEO was the former founder and CEO of Firemon, Jody Brazil, but he was the CEO of DisruptOps. We were his next thing, and even he had to take a step and like, what's the through line story? And we had been moving DisruptOps really deep down the operational path. Anyway, this is, people listening probably don't care, but it ended up being a really nice
inside baseball. Rich,
inside baseball, nobody cares.
Rich, you have not been on the show in a long time, so I have 5 questions for you. Ready to play 5 questions with Security Weekly?
Let's do it.
3 words to describe yourself.
Short, bald, red hair.
If you were a serial killer, what would be your weapon of choice?
See, the problem is if my daughter listens to this show, she's going to really criticize this one because I think she wants weapon of choice for serial killer. Damn, this is a good one. See, I need to put thought into this. What?
You're a paramedic. This could be interesting.
Yeah, but the problem is it's like boring. I could just run around and inject people with potassium. That would do the job, but there's like no excitement there. Let's just say I would be the defibrillator. Yeah, because I think that would be very dramatic.
If you were to write a book about yourself, what would the title be?
Not Dead Yet.
What is your favorite hacker movie?
Sneakers. Come on.
Choose 2 celebrities to be your parents.
Living, dead, alive, or fictional? I got that wrong, but same idea.
Something like that. Really, anyone. Fictional.
Yeah, let's go with all right, I'm gonna go with Jimmy Buffett because I'm a huge parrot head. And I could just go with like who's gonna make me better looking. Like, there's the genetics way to answer this question, and then there's the lifestyle way. All right, so we'll go with just with Buffett because I'm a parrot head. And oh no, I take that back. Okay, Walt Disney. And who would be my mom?
It can be 2
free Disney tickets.
Yeah, this is 2022, man.
No, I'm going to be a little traditional, and then Buffy the Vampire Slayer.
There you go.
I think that'd be a good combo.
Yeah.
Amazing. Rich Mogull, thank you for joining us here on Paul Security Weekly.
Thanks for having me. I love talking to you guys. So
Outstanding.
thanks for letting me talk about the fun stuff I'm doing.
Yes. Thank you very much, Rich, Josh. And that will conclude this episode of Paul's Security Weekly. Thank you, everyone, for listening and watching. See you next time. Over and out.